You all enjoyed the gameplay you saw earlier today? That was something, right? So today we want to break down a little bit further what you saw when we were flying over Hurston and walking through Lorville. So yeah, let's kick it off.
Okay, hello everyone. Good to see you again. What we're going to cover this year is a little bit more specific as to what we've been focusing on, mainly Hurston, which is why it's called the Art of Hurston. The main things we'll get into is to why we can do what we consider an entire talk just on Hurston. But before we get into that, obviously I'm Ian. I'm the Star Citizen art director. This is Michelle. You'll notice there was a third member of our company that unfortunately didn't make it. Complications in the airport, so we'll just jump straight in. So what do we want to achieve? So this was going to be our first planet in Star Citizen. The two main things that we wanted to really push was the feeling of scale and diversity. The current play space right now in the game is obviously it's quite big, but what we had the opportunity to do on Hurston was to expand that play space by many factors. So we wanted to make sure that we wanted to push that diversity. So when you guys play it, it feels like an interesting experience. Okay, so scale. If our calculations are correct, in-game diameter of Daymar is 590 kilometers. Hurston is 232,370 kilometers, so yeah. It's quite a lot bigger.
And imagine the variety that we currently have on Daymar, scale that up to, what is it? My math is really bad. To the new size of what Hurston is, and you easily, it's quite easy to see, like, okay, with that amount of space to cover, we need more variety because it's going to be not worth even having that much space if we don't break it up and add more exciting stuff for you guys to explore.
Sure. So jumping straight in, we'll focus on Lorville first, and then we'll spread out to the rest of Hurston. So establishing the mood of a city. So usually what we do is when we have a location, it's usually got a pretty good breakdown from the lore team. And, you know, I'm sure you guys understand what Lorville is right now. So we wanted something that portrayed that feeling of heavy pollution. We wanted that mood and tone to feel consistent with the downtrodden population. So these are like early concept development sketches to just try and dial in the mood, the tone, quite high level. But even at this early stage, we knew we had a good palette to work from. Because it's going to be an industrial city, we thought that's going to be something that's quite interesting to tie into in the cityscape. And then also we started doing some visual development into trying to understand what like a day in the life of a miner around Lorville might feel like. So we did this exploration period for some time, and we all got internally quite excited about what we could do for Lorville. Okay, establishing the read of the city. So you'll notice, if you remember back to last year, Lorville got a little bit bigger than what we did. The feeling was to portray the scale of a city. We really needed to break down the core archetypes of a city. So what that means is you can start to establish the different regions. So if you look in, you know, so you've got the big guy there, but around him, you've got the CBD regions, and these are good because they'll give you that relative scale next to the big guy. And then that will go out across into the inner industrial areas and the outer industrial areas. So even in this very early, this was like literally a screenshot from my monitor as we were working out that proportion of the city. And if you do a side-by-side to what's in game to this, even on that very early stage, you start to get an idea of what that scale would be.
And I think if we put it to the one that we had last year, not only did the Hurston Dynamics building grow significantly, I think the footprint that just around that building was basically all the space that we used last year. So we really pushed that boundary and made it grow way, way beyond that limit.
Well, if you remember last year, you could actually fly over the city reasonably quickly, and it's like me flying over London in a few seconds. It just didn't work. So we really did spend some time on making sure we got that scale right before we took it any further in our pipeline. So once we got something that we were happy with there, then we start to dial in the concepts to try and go a bit deeper into the shape language. As I said before, we wanted to really push these bold vertical forms because it's not like a residential city or something. It's something that was built on industry. So I really like the idea that the skyline is almost dominated to something like that. So you can see how we're starting to develop ideas, and it honestly felt like we was developing like a real-time strategy game for the longest period, because we would see like these images on the board of these top-down three-quarter views, and we're like, hey, an RTS game would be kind of cool. So as we progressed forward, we started to really think about the DNA of the city, and we thought we quite like these large plated areas, but then we thought, wouldn't it be quite interesting if we have areas where you kind of take off some of those platings and you start to get a little glimpse to the underbelly of what's inside the lower sections of Lorville. So this kind of shows you like a part of the development process where we're breaking down the visual language of the location.
What makes this interesting for us as the people who are actually building the 3D models in this space is the fact that it is layered, and everything that started out at the ground layer is still there, and it's became these very dark underbelly areas of the city, which have a very different atmosphere and feeling to it from what the levels above that have. So within this layered system, you get almost like a variety of styles that you can do with how you dress it up, what type of characters you would run into. We had for the longest time, the joke of Dangerous Dave would be his corner where you could buy all this illegal stuff. So that starts to become a story in its own. Like each area would be very different, and just looking at these concepts, we could already start to imagine, okay, this is how this space would be like, this is how this space would be like. Mm-hmm. So this was a really exciting approach for us.
Sure, and whereas a previous image, which is quite visual, more of a map painting, that's really good for getting the team inspired about the location, this sort of image that you're seeing right here, it solves all the problems. It's not big and glamorous, but you start to realize, okay, what is this city going to be made of? For the longest time, I was thinking, how's this city actually going to bleed out onto the landscape? How's that going to be? Because Todd was always talking to me like, well, the players are going to get lost, right? They're going to be able to get trapped in some outer regions, and they're not really going to have a good time. But that was something that we would have to solve a little bit later on, which I'll show you. Because this was going to be our first real major landing zone, we knew we wanted to get. So right now, if you play, if you're on a moon and you wanted to go inside an outpost, you get out your ship, you go through an airlock, and you're inside, right? But we wanted to give that feeling of scale of a city. We wanted the player to be able to fly in, land in the city. So we had to kind of really think about, okay, what would a Star Citizen spaceport be? So this was like an early concept sketch to show what Lorville spaceport could be. So you've got the landing areas there on the left, but then something that feels visually correct for Lorville, you've got these huge container yards. So we all got quite excited by that, and if you see like those little landing pads on the left, like that's an Idris size. So we were like, okay, we've really got to go big on this guy. Okay, so from there, jump into pretty much what you just saw. So this was like a still frame of the build right now. You can see the various reads of the city. You can see the CBD in the distance. You got the big guy, and then you can start to see how that landscape start to transition into the different city archetypes. And also at the bottom there, you can start to see these transit systems being introduced into the city. One of the things that was very important, there's like an early image I made of Lorville creeping around on the internet, and it's like an angle like this from a long time ago, and it was very, very, very important for me to, when we bring the camera down, and when you're looking up at this big building, it should always feel like he's just towering over you at all times. Compositionally, that it just felt really right for the location. I felt the sky was quite empty, considering this was going to be like a super city. So I wanted to put in these almost the like buoys in the city in the air. So you'll see like the TISA spaceport. This actually became quite useful. So when you guys start to play this, we have like this no-fly zone because we don't want to get you guys too deep into the city. So these actually became quite good markers, even for Glenn. You know, as we were doing demo playthroughs, I was like, "Hey, buddy, you got to keep above those markers." So that's something visually started to push useful design. Wide shot of the spaceport, and again, you can see that transit route from an aerial view. So in the middle left of the screen, that's the landing zone, and you can see it follow it around. So when we started to introduce transit routes, Lorville became this, almost like this train set as we started to connect it all together. There's quite a lot of landing pads and hangars around Lorville for two reasons. We wanted lots of, obviously, locations for the players to land in, but also we wanted these ambient landing pads for the ship AI to use. And it's a shame you didn't see in the demo, because when you're stood overlooking the spaceport and seeing traffic come and go, you start to, even in an early form, you start to get that, oh yeah, this is going to be really good. I can see this working. Yeah. Because obviously the city of Lorville ends and it starts to go into the wilderness, you can see, because we spent a lot of time trying to figure out the visual design of the city, when you get like these wide shots, you can see how like these bold silhouette forms that we spent time developing starts becoming quite nice and readable. And when you want to traverse around the city, you can it almost looks different from every angle. So I'm really looking forward to you guys doing your Twitch streams, because I'll be watching them and seeing what shots you can get. And then we deliberately pushed to have the biomes around Lorville. We tried to break them up, not to the point where it became like a theme park, but the outer region of Lorville is split up into 6 gates. And depending on which way you're coming in from, we wanted you to start to recognize oh, I remember this is what gate 3 feels like, this is what gate 2 feels like. Very subtly, we're just doing composition tricks. So after you've been doing a few missions around Lorville, you'll start to get a read of the city. It's quite interesting because, you know, we can just literally grab the sun and move it around, and the city itself starts to have different moods and tones throughout the different times of day, and I think we all like it when it's sunset, because you start to see the city lights a little bit more vibrant. And this is kind of like a snapshot of where we are right now. We have a lot of tech planned for our cities in the future to do with placement and lighting to get that final cinematic frame. Okay.
Let's break it down.
Let's break it down. Apologies, we've got a lot of slides to get through. I think we had about 50 slides last year. We've got 180 to get through, so I'm going to go quick.
We'll try and speed it up a little bit.
As we was pushing towards the demo, we were saying we need way less slides, but there's so much complexity to what went into the demo you just saw, and I want to try and show you all the hard work we put in. So breaking down the landing zone. So we started right here, L19. We called it, it was the workers' district for the longest time, but we started calling it L19 because it felt right, and it felt like Lorville was split up into various different zones that you don't necessarily get to see right now. So this was a piece of concept which was distilled into. So we did visual development for the landing zone, but this was the one which pretty much ticked all the boxes. So from this one image, it hit every DNA point for what makes the Lorville land zone itself. So if I start to break it down, right at the top there, you've got these large plates and overhangs. So when you look out, you feel like you're in a basin. You've got these large vertical flat faces, which is quite interesting because the sunlight barely ever reaches where you go. And it feels right because, you know, when you see like these AI walking around downtrodden, they're literally getting starved to sunlight. And then about halfway down the frame, you'll see these guardrails, these platforms. So we split it up so that almost at all times, you're being overlooked. There's an opportunity for these guard AIs to overlook the population, and the system designers at work started to get quite excited about those possibilities. So we started to put in doors, and then if they see trouble, they'll be able to come down and sort it out. And then when we get down to the workers level, it's kind of, as we've seen, we can see lots of cameras, lots of listening devices, and then throughout Lorville, you'll get like deeper areas where you can actually look down and see these layers going down. Right. Okay, because this was going to be quite a sprawling landing zone, we kind of realized early on we was going to need good
People
navigation.
People were getting lost.
Sure. So we wanted to combine big, bold with good kind of city navigation. See these guys throughout the landing zone, and them later on to do some messaging. I don't know any of them in the demo. Our team came up with some, and you'll have
prop.
Yeah. There's a good story behind this. As we was doing the kind of like the dressing part of the landing zone, I thought it'd be really interesting to have like these vending machines. So when you're there, I wanted the first thing to see is like someone's wearing like a single-use mask or something, you know, to really try and give that feeling like I'm definitely not in Area 18 anymore. There's weather warnings here, so this in combination with, you know, some of the headwear you saw in the demo feels quite cool. Okay, so this is a example of what we do is once we've started white box and we're happy and we started gray box in, we start to do like these very early in-engine look development. So here we're basically trying to dial in the composition. So you'll see these larger oppressive shapes starting to be established, and then also straight up, I wanted the main security tower. So what we did was, wherever you go within L19, you can always see the security tower, and it's basically it works thematically, but it also aids navigation because no matter where you are, you can always check back, and you're like, okay, I know if I get on the other side of there, that's where I'll be. Also, it helps on dialing in like the light in the atmosphere, VFX. This was the toned down version. The one I showed to Chris first it was like a nuclear winter, and he's like, that's just a little too much.
And some final shots of the different areas around Lorville. This being Leavesden Square, being a more like final version of the white boxed version that you guys just saw in the video. So final lighting came in, final dressing came in, particle effects and AI all doing their thing. From a different angle, you can see that we pretty much stuck with the same architecture, but everything is way more defined, so the final models came in. But it's still very close to that initial feeling that we prototyped. The other side?
Sure. People off stage are giving me the motion, so yeah. I'm like, oh, cool. We've got 100 slides to go, so we'll speed up. Again, these are just in-engine shots, so you can start to see this is the Leavesden Square. You can start to see those deeper areas inside the city. We thought it'd be really cool to have like these vista points where you can start to see the city being alive around you. Moving on to Leavesden Station. So the whole motif of this scene was to give that read of a train arrives. You get these workers coming off the train. They've been in the mine all day, and they can go up the stairs. They can either buy some gear, they can get some cheap food, or they can just go and hit the bar. So the whole reason for this area was to sell that narrative. And when you see the trains coming and go, it feels quite cool. And then you've got these underbelly sections. So you'll have like these outer areas, and then to get in to link them together, you have to go back under the city. So we changed the composition, we changed the lighting, and then we start to see a bit more of these adverts come through, and then you got Baghead there. Okay, so real quick on the shops. We knew we wanted various shops within the city. We thought it'd be interesting if they almost rent the same unit and they theme and brand themselves. So apologies if I'm blasting through these slides, because we'll get through them. So we've got Tammany & Sons. This was the inside of administration that we didn't get to see in the demo. We did see this guy. This is reclamation disposal, and obviously you saw Don Ely. Don Ely's exterior. So we didn't want it to feel like Disneyland, where we wanted at least like the facade and the area around that facade to feel cohesive. So, in the future, this could, I could see lots of activity in here in the future. And then we got the bar. It's a shame we didn't see that the trains go through the bar, because from the first, in the ideation stage for the bar, the thing I wanted to do is I wanted a bar lower than the main area, and I wanted windows, and I wanted the train to come past. So, when that train comes past and everyone's glasses start to rattle and the light comes through, we just didn't see it in the demo, unfortunately. Okay, pushing faster through. So common elements, you heard Todd and Chris talk about common elements. What are common elements? They are basically connecting, they're basically units which help connect spaces together. So rather than doing everything bespoke and unique every single time, these help connect spaces together. So the first one we saw was obviously habitation. Again, we did some visual design, but we thought it'd be quite interesting to take some of these industrial structures that you see in the city, like this straddle frame, and what would happen if they repurpose those to be actual housing units. So we thought, hey, we're going to be high up. Wouldn't it be great to have some big windows so we can see out over the city? So these are like communal areas, and then each hab kind of goes off from that. I'm sure you saw this on ATV, but we did a sprint on modular habitation units. So, we wanted to get that feeling that it was mass-produced a long time ago, for these worker areas. And because the architecture was going to feel quite utilitarian, we wanted that personality to come from the dressing elements inside. So what we did was we broke down each module, and we did visual designs for each module, and we did variants. So, we did like various kitchens, various, bed units, things like that. And then we all got quite excited. Like I wanted to see that personality, so we did quite a few sheets of like ideas for dressing, some concepts, and it would be kind of cool to see you guys place these in your units in the future.
White box. This
was the white box, and very important at this early stage. We keep proportions, so even from white box, things tends to expand quite easily, but we try to keep it tight. And then this was the final frame. I'm getting messages there saying, you're out of time, please wrap it up. So I'm going to keep going. We got a lot. Thank you. We'll go. Okay, and then this is the final frame of the this kind of like the area around the hubs, the lobby area, and we wanted that city shot. So as soon as you come out the hub, and you see that spaceport, and then as an idea, as we go to other landing zones, and you're like, hey, my hub's on Area 18 or my hub's on Horizon, you can start to see how we could theme them quite differently. I think that's going to be quite cool. Okay, pushing forward, next common element, transit. We knew we needed a way to connect players throughout the city, so we pushed forward on these transit systems. Visually, it references modern design quite a lot, like a London Underground, just with a slight visual twist. And then this was in game, and that ticker tape of the your train's going to be arriving. That came in this morning, so that was quite cool to see, you know. But we were, for the longest time, we were like, we'll put a map on, you know, we'll do all of these things to imply the trains come in. You know, it says there, you know, train approaching. In theory, the train is always approaching, but we wanted, obviously suffered a bit more accurate. And then also to aid navigation as well, we did everything we could. So you've got signs, and these signs are accurate to where you go, and they're color coded, so you'll get an idea of, hey, I'm on the spaceport line, or I'm on the outer district line. And then on top of that, we knew we needed to connect them all together. And as Todd said, it was painful for the team. It was very painful for the team because we literally had to connect all the dots together physically. So this was a shot inside one of the transit tunnels, and as you can see, it's quite detailed. So if one day your train breaks down and you get out, it would be kind of interesting. All right, so that was the transit route that took you into the spaceport. Next one was security. So this one is maybe a little bit light right now in terms of functionality, but that will come through in the future. So this was a very early concept design for what we wanted to do. You can see the right part of that image we kept, but the left part we wanted, we went through a few iterations. So this was an early VT, and I was looking at it, and I'm like, that system of taking off your bag and putting it on something, that's just going to cause all kinds of headaches. So then we thought, wouldn't it be really cool if you
Do spread them and scan them.
Spread them and scan them. Yeah,
And
right.
you will find these scattered throughout the city as well for random searches, just in case there's some contraband.
I think a lot of the team really latched onto this idea, so we'll get them in at some point. So then we're like, okay, we can't do that. So what we ended up with was something that both the player and the AI couldn't get through. And then the final frame was this. So when you look at this now, functionality will start to come through, and what design have planned for it, it's going to be really cool. Yeah. Okay. Next one, so we was at security, and then we're like, right, okay, we're inside the spaceport. What does a spaceport look like? It can't look like L19, so after talking with Lord, this is where Hurston Dynamics would spend a bit more money. This is the more commercial side. It's not the kind of downtrodden area of the workers' district, so we came up with a visual design which felt quite cool, you know, nice lighting, nice materials and shaders, things like that. And then this is how it came through. And our idea of what we wanted to do for the spaceport started quite simple, and then it got bigger and got bigger and bigger, and then before too long there was panoramic views out onto the spaceport. There was ship shops in there as well, so it got quite big, but
almost a city on its own.
But the team did quite well. So these are going to be like hubs in the future for you guys to traverse around. And then we got that M50 and if you've ever gone through, was it London Airport or something? No, Manchester Airport. There's always this Jaguar, always on sale. It's always on sale, and we wanted that idea of like, you know, there's a ship on show that kind of helps lead you into the shop. Okay, spaceport done, and then we were like, right, onto hangars. So hangars is something that we've wanted to dig into for quite a long time. And now we finally got the opportunity to start looking into this. So this is our first set of utilitarian hangars. So we broke down the modularity, and for the word go, I didn't want a box. I didn't want, like, we knew they were going to be big. The blockout we got from design was a box, so we tried to think of any way we could to add complexity to that space. So we broke it down, and I thought, wouldn't it be really cool to have like these little alcoves where if you look, you see a little bit of activity where there's NPCs maybe fixing some part or loading some cargo or something. Or maybe there's like some transit cranes going through. So when you land, I wanted that idea that these spaces start to become alive around you. So when you land your ship, the AI start to get into it and things start to move. We didn't have any associated gameplay with these modules, but I thought it'd be cool to imply, like this is maybe the refueling part, this is maybe the cargo, drones, things like that. So what we ended up with, you know, this was the final shot of the drone repair bay, cargo, refueling, and this was more of like a generic bay. And then this is where we went into the hangar. So I think we was all quite happy with how these guys turned out.
Yeah. And we have a little panning shot.
Cool. And then also, as we were running through this, I was thinking to myself, right, these things need to, as a common element, we need to be able to take these, theme them, brand them, then we got a location. That's the whole ethos of what a common element is. So one day I was like, what would the one on ArcCorp or what would one on Area 18 feel like? So I quickly did a lighting pass, quickly did a dressing pass, and then changed some shader. I was like, okay, this could feel quite interesting.
I think if we wrap up the stats, we might get to the planet stuff.
Yeah, so we're gonna push because we are halfway through. This was the transit line to the outer gate. As you can see, it goes on quite far. Then we start to get onto the outer districts. So remember that problem we talked about before? How's that city actually going to end? So this was one of my VTs where I'm thinking what that outer wall could feel like, because I wanted something that was readable but wasn't necessarily low-res and boring. So from this, the guys started to do a white box, and as soon as we saw this, we knew we had something that ticked that scale read, because it felt like we was on a buggy ride on the outside of a city. It felt really quite interesting. When you see that big guy in the distance, it just felt right. So we knew it was, from an early stage in white box, we had something that felt quite special.
And all that skill obviously needs to be translated in anything that you interact with closer up as well. So when we go to the next one, this is the work in progress on the Hurston wall. And what we were very keen on was to not have a flat wall for you guys to run into. Everything has layers to it. So this is also translated into the wall pieces themselves. And then we have some final shots.
So yeah, this is pretty much what you saw in the demo. Kind of holds up, and then we have these gates. So these, as I said, these are the 6 gates around Lorville. So these are what you need to look out for, because these are the main ways into the city. So we made it tall and we put a big flare on it, and hopefully that's going to read. And then at night, obviously, they'll be lit quite nicely. And then Chris obviously told you that this guy got quite big, 4,328 meters in length, and obviously Lorville itself got quite big. But overall, it helped us push towards scale. So when I like to do screenshots, I'll put my guy of scale in there, and that kind of gives you that feeling. So even on the outer wall, looking at the big guy, it feels quite large. And as you start to go out into the landscape, you still can see this the city in the distance, and that feels quite interesting. Okay, so that wraps up the Lorville part, and now we can start to move on to the Hurston part of the presentation.
And the planet itself. Obviously, like we said at the start, so far we've been doing moons, and moving on to a full planet with biome diversity, a lot more square kilometers to it. We really were reevaluating how our tech worked, because what we've done up till now, it held up, but once you start introducing more complex systems, it became quite clear to us that we needed more and needed to go back to the drawing board. So let's just first quickly jump through the biomes that we have. So this is the one that already was shown last year. It's just the wastelands, like 40 to 50% of the surface of Hurston. It's basically what's left after all the heavy industry. And we have, wherever the coast hits land, we have the polluted coast. Obviously, the coast has had similar treatments. It's very nasty polluted, and it had its effects on the beach and the shores. Then there's obviously a lot of industry going on. The mining pits are one of the unique features that you would find on Hurston, both old and newer, more active ones. Then we had the trash mesa.
Remember this guy from last year?
Yeah. This is basically the dumping grounds for anything that's not considered worth scrapping or even keeping. It's just, they put it in a big ship, fly it out, and just dump it there, because they don't really care about the planet. The planet is all about getting the resources out and then just getting it processed in the most convenient way. And then we have a few sparks of hope left on Hurston. the savanna, which is the new feature that we added and put a lot of effort in. So hopefully we try to get a bit more in depth on that one. But it's what Hurston used to look like before the industry came in and destroyed a lot of it. And then as a little color accent, we added a acidic biome. Obviously, a planet rich in minerals and resources often has some volatile spots. I think that's what these acidic fields represent. It's around 5% of the planet that you can find these areas.
We wanted something extra in there that felt like the planet was starting to fight its way back. So these are very minimal on Hurston, but when you find them, it completely shifts that palette.
All right. Then we're going to jump in on what we changed on the text on the text side. So before, you might have, if you saw last year's panel, you might have seen this breakdown talking about the ecosystem textures. This system is still valid, but the top texture turned out to be our limiting factor. Because we tried to do the mining system, and this is some early shots at the mining pits. And if you look at this one, it's very clear that this tree-colored top texture was basically driving everything we did. So each color had a unique set of textures assigned to it, a unique set of assets assigned to it. And having just 3 channels to mask these areas out was not enough. So we wanted to dive a bit deeper into the system and see what we can improve. Obviously, when you start digging into the ground, you see all these different layers of sediment and different colors. And especially when you want to do more diverse biomes, you need more of that variety. So here's another shot, and you can clearly see how this 3-channel system, while it worked fine for the moons, was clearly holding us back, getting this nice, rich color breakup. So this is what we ended up adding. We added a new texture with like a full color RGB that gave us the full range of colors, and then 16 unique grayscale channels in the alpha channel. So those 16 unique grayscale values allowed us to apply 16 unique material types, and it was no longer bound to that initial 3-color mask, because that was initially driving everything. So in order to make that new color map blend with our ground materials, we went actually back to a bit older trick where terrain was done in games by excluding the colors from the textures and then applying a larger scale color map. So we have a bit newer algorithm to get the most dominant color out, so it's slightly improved over a traditional method, but sometimes what works. And in this case, it helped us scale up drastically. So here's some examples of the color map being applied, and with a bit more tweaking and getting the hang of the best balance, we started to see this way smoother color transitions, no more sharp patches of breakup, and way richer palette of color. So when we got to this point, we started to feel like, okay, we're finally ready to tackle the savanna, which we'll talk about in a bit. Top-down view, obviously, people fly over our planets quite a bit, and I'm sure everybody enjoys a nice view. So it's really cool to see all these colors come in and see how far we can actually push this now. One thing that ties into this coloring is our asset scattering. We talked about this last year, where we had different color variations for each type of rock, and that was tied to where it was scattered. Now that we have a way more fluid transition of different colors, it was really hard to get that color to match up. So we improved our asset integration by allowing it to pick up this color from the ground and actually allow us to say, okay, we'll pick up a little bit from the color or take all of the color and get a complete match. So we get a way nicer integration of our assets in the terrain. Another thing that we unfortunately lost initially was the soft blending, because we had 16 unique layers, but blending 16 unique layers in the traditional way was way too expensive. So what we figured out was we could use dithering to actually get the illusion of soft blending. So there's a dither pattern that's basically hard cutting between A and B, And because it's such a fine-grained dither pattern, you actually don't see that it's doing that. So it smooths out the terrain and the blending while making it still affordable. And then here's a quick look around the mining pit. That's a view, right? Colors, all the stuff is there. Thank you. This was one of Pascal's efforts, and yeah, it's unfortunate that he couldn't be here to hear that applause, but I'm sure he appreciates it.
I think at this stage we kind of knew we'd started developing the tech to a point where we could start tackling some more complex biome types. So I think when we got to that stage, we was like, okay,
let's do the savanna.
Let's do the savanna.
Right.
So doing botanicals is hard. Doing botanicals on a planet is very hard. So we were like, right, we're going to have to just jump straight in. So yeah, this was one of our artist screenshots. So we work in what we call botanical zoos. And then we kind of validate how the assets are working together in a very controlled environment. So we can start to see if the asset looks good, how the relationships between the assets look before we start distributing it across the planet. So yes, already within a zoo, it starts to feel quite nice at an early stage. So we started to push, and we started to try and distribute these across the planet. So these are very early savanna shots that we saw.
And the thing that we already were familiar with was the actual creation of the botanical assets. In that regards, the pipeline was fairly familiar, and we could just get on with building the assets. But when you start putting this stuff on a planet and you want more dynamic stuff, it became clear there was some stuff missing. So when we talk about the object scattering, there's a certain pattern that nature follows, the certain way it spreads out, the certain way assets cluster together, seeds fall from the tree, new bushes sprout out from there, and we really pushed hard to make sure that we can actually apply this natural logic to how our assets is spread.
One thing that you'll start to see a trend in is to try and overcome art obstacles. You can look at it on a planet, you're like, oh, this is great, but something's missing. The one thing we always had to do is go back to a controlled kind of art scene to validate that artwork. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. You're seeing a controlled scene, and you're literally assessing or trying to build a rule set for what the tech needs to do. And what Michelle said was right, we can scatter assets everywhere, but actually, because we've all walked around in nature, nature does very specific things. And when you see something that is slightly off, like this, you're like, wait a minute, do you know what I mean? So it's, as a way of developing, it became the process. So we would try something locally, build that rule set, push that into the tech, move on. So as a process, that worked quite well, we found.
Yeah. So this obviously is not a flattering screenshot, but it was definitely showing us what kind of problems we were running into, and then tying that back to this specific texture. This was once again a limiting factor. There's only 3 channels, and for example, the blue channel is specifically to mask out edges of the hills. The green channel, in this case, is the bottom of the canyon. And if you want to do very dense clusters, open fields, or very different density types, you're really running out of channels rather quickly. So the solution to that was to go back and think about it again, and actually doubling the amount of channels we have now.
Add more channels?
From 2 to 6.
Add more channels?
So that even means that on the mining pit one, which is on the left, we could mask out roads and give those areas a bit more space. And those little red dots, for example, could be areas where we would scatter some man-made objects instead of sacrificing a full channel to do that. And then a further addition when we're talking about scatter patterns, if we have to calculate every single drop point for every single asset, it's going to be super expensive because every single drop point has to be calculated, checked for if it's floating or not. And if you want to increase the density, not only are we limited to a certain grid size, we're also limited to how much stuff we can actually calculate. So what we came up with was a scatter pattern dummy model, basically. It's one specific scatter point, and then it's a few dummy points that are linked to that asset. And we drop that single asset, and we can then assign a specific group of trees or rocks to those dummy points. So here's a few example scatter patterns and a few very dense ones for very small objects. And then each of those numbers, like 1 to 30, we could assign the actual rocks. So we only have to do the calculation once, where to drop it, and then we can actually render a whole batch of assets in one go. So here's how that would look like, and you already start to feel like, okay, this is a way more natural fall off of like the bigger rocks, and you have smaller rocks, and you have some vegetation that starts to creep up underneath. And the cool thing is that these patterns are blanco. So we make a library of those patterns, and then we can reuse them and apply different sets of assets. So with a different set of assets applied. And then when we talk about the coloring and the scatter patterns, the way we added all the materials, you start to see something that it feels way more natural than what you would see on Daymar, Delamar, Yela, even though we're really, really happy with how those came out. I think, but all the stuff we added in the meantime, we got to push it way further. This is a little tease of Aberdeen, one of Hurston's moons. But yeah, this is definitely where we want to push it further.
Okay, so we introduced that part of it, and we started getting better results. But again, it was like, okay, something's still missing. So again, we take the assets and we validate it in a controlled scene. And the main thing we try to focus on here is lighting and how light scatters through that object. Because when you start to see like a bunch of trees together, the way it actually occludes light is quite interesting, and trying to simulate that on a planet scale was quite hard, and it's something that we're not there yet. Canopy shading is something that we really do want to push, and when Chris was talking about we want to do like really dense jungles and quite thick areas of botanicals, it's something that we need to continue to push the tech to get to. But what you kind of see in here is the shader set up on the leaves and how much light to get through, how much is too much, how much isn't enough, how that works with our billboards as well, because the team had quite a long time, or quite a hard job trying to get the LODs of the assets working, because when you look at a tree in the distance, obviously the light is scattered naturally, and trying to recreate that on a flat billboard was quite challenging.
And then another thing that would be a missing component is movement. Let me just skip through the video. Obviously, we've seen trees move back and forth before. This is not a new thing, but one of the things that is important to realize is that this is based on a calculation like X and Y, and we push into X and Y directions. The issue actually kicks in when you realize that's all based on a flat plane terrain. We're doing everything spherical, so we had to go back and just change the math to actually make sure that X and Y are at least relative to where you are on the planet. So we started to get pretty, this is a first pass, and then after a little bit of tweaking and iterating, we started to get some results that we're getting really happy with.
It turns out movement, again, was quite challenging, because trying to get something that works on one asset, but then also would work on a distribution of those assets, because you could see something that worked quite natural on one, but then you array, and then they're all kind of doing this, you know. So there was lots of meetings when we're all kind of like acting out wind bending for the longest period of time. And what we want to do is we want to define wind strength per ecosystem. So no matter what asset you put in, as long as you calibrate that asset to work in a minimum wind strength and a maximum wind strength, then in theory, you can just change that wind strength per ecosystem and all the assets should move. So it's not just trees, but it's like smaller stuff like bushes, and then it goes down to grass. And all three of them kind of work in very different ways. So that took a while to push through. And then in the end, like we had to tone down the wind strength quite a lot for the demo because the smoke reacts to it. And for one time we had where the relay was, it was really blowing a storm quite like that. I thought it felt quite cool, but it was just too chaotic. You know, when you was trying to have a gunfight in there, it was too much.
And when you look at the future of the system, obviously right now we determine it by ecosystem, but this would tie in or be driven by a more global influenced weather system. Okay, jumping through it. Object coloring. So when we talk about object coloring on vegetation, one of the things that we ran into is like if we start reusing trees, we had a canopy that was like fairly green, and that's fine. But what happens when you start to add more diversity? We first started looking at, okay, we use the same system. We make a material variation for a tree, have a few variations, and then apply that to the tree. But managing that content and making sure that it was actually looking good and scattered nicely and spread out started to become a bit of a challenge. Also because it's three colors and it's going to stand out. It doesn't feel natural or organic. So one thing we did as well was to make an adjustment in the shader where we could just put in a strip of colors, and it's just one shader for all the trees, and it will just pick up the color from that strip and just assign a random variation within that strip. So here's a very subtle one, but if we introduce a few more colors, you can see how this starts to become a more natural thing. And the cool thing is we only need to manage one shader. We apply it to everything, and it will work. And just to illustrate or emphasize what is going on behind the scenes, this one is just
Rainbow Planet.
Rainbow Planet, yeah. So this very clearly illustrates, like you put a rainbow strip in there, and it will just pick up the colors and randomly distributes them. And here on the grass, but obviously it works a bit better with a bit more subtle approach.
We're getting closer, but there's still more work to be done. So this was a feedback sheet I gave. Like the bottom image is where we was at currently, and then the top image is a painter I gave to try and push the team to establish the correct palette. Because what happens is you can work on all the assets, everything that Michelle's saying is all credible, but when you distribute it and put it in the scene, you're like, it's still not gelling together. So what we had to do was we had to suck out some of the greens and start to unify that palette together to something that felt a bit more consistent. And after that feedback, these are the shots that we were starting to get, and I think was all internally going, yeah, this feels really good. One of the things we wanted to do as well is we'll have these regions where we can set up these regions where it's literally the pure green botanicals. It's literally no pollution's got to them. So it'd be cool, people finding those. And they were like, right, okay, we're so close, but there's something. Then the more we kind of looked at it, we're so used to seeing our atmosphere in a very particular way, the way the light scatters through the atmosphere, the way we see sunsets as red and blue skies in the daytime. And for the longest time, we had the atmosphere set up on the right. So then I was looking at it, like, something's just not right. It's just not where we want it to be. So then we calibrated Hurston to look like Earth. And then instantly we were like, this starts to feel really good. So what we did was we tuned it to somewhere in the middle, so it still had an element that felt thematically correct for Hurston, but it still had that believable and cinematic quality to it. So after all of that lumped all together, this is where we finally ended up with. And I think everyone was very happy.
I was just going to jump through the final shots here.
We was going to say we'll just have one planet shot of the savannah. We chose 9, so we're just going to cycle through 9. But you can see how every single point we covered was pushing towards making these final screenshots where we wanted it to be.
And obviously we had some final shots for the other ecosystems as well, just tying back to where we started. So the Hurston Wasteland used to be savanna, but hey, pollution and such. Huh? The coast. The mining.
Interesting enough, you heard Chris mention when we was flying over that, was that a road? It's not a road tool per se, but we have the complexity now within our textures to define a road leading through. And one thing I recommend you all to do is grab a buggy and then just follow one of those dirt paths along, because you can literally just follow along, put some headphones on, and it's really good. And I think we're all at that point now where we see less visual errors, and we're at these points where like this is starting to feel quite good.
Yeah. Final shots of the trash mesa and the acidic.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you who follow along regularly with ATV, you might know that Ariel, one of the other moons of Hurston, is a very acidic moon. So you'll be seeing way more of this on Ariel.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So to close, we got through all 180 slides. What do we want to achieve? We wanted to achieve the first planet in Star Citizen, pushing the feeling of scale and the feeling of diversity, and that was the same for Lorville as well. I think we all pushed quite hard, and we're all quite happy with where we ended up with. It's worth also noting it's a huge team effort. So this is the Star Citizen Environment and Lighting team. We are relatively small in number, but then you've also got the other disciplines as well. So I think it's worth noting it was a huge collaboration by everyone. And also, we are hiring. So
if any of the stuff that we talked about excites you, and if you're into 3D art, texturing, environment stuff, we are looking. If
you want us to help us build the stars, yeah. I mean, that's true, because we have people in our studio right now who joined us from the community or went to school because of Star Citizen, and that's great. So, we are hiring. So if you're passionate like we are, we want to speak to you in the future. And that wraps up the presentation just on the hour mark. So thank you very much.